thank you for the organizers for inviting me to this interesting conference. I'm going to talk about representation of the Sphinx on engraved gems. Is it a preserver of life or demon of death? Well, engraved gems are precious or semi-precious stones with images featuring on them. During the Greek and Roman period, they were used as seals, jewelry, and amulets. Various images were carved on the gems, such as gods, mythological themes, famous sculptures, astrological signs, and portraits. In their own time, the depictions on gems were both meaningful and also often symbolic. The images depicted on seal rings bore a magical meaning of threat and warning. Anyone who dared to break the seal knew that he risked a terrible punishment for this crime. So the effectiveness of the seal was based on the fear of what might befall with the subsequently discovery. When analyzing the symbols that appear on gems, we find elements borrowed from ancient mythologies such as Babylonian and especially Egyptian. According to ancient writers, the devices shown on the seal rings were meaningful and for the wearer. For example, it is known that Pompeius chose a depiction of a lion holding a sword. Julius Caesar chose that of an armed Aphrodite, while Augustus had 3 rings. The first featured a Sphinx, the second a portrait of Alexander, and the third his own portrait made by Dioscorides. Well, Sphinxes are depicted on 4 gems from the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. 3 feature a winged sphinx seated in profile in the foreground with unique hairstyles, and another has a naked sphinx seen leaping upon a nude warrior. These gems from the Israel Museum depict sphinxes with wings drawn back, thus linking them to the type associated with the first seal of Augustus. The winged sphinx on the cornelian gem has a headdress with diagonal lines across it, and feathers are seen above the forehead, probably a remnant of the headdress sometimes used to characterize Egyptian sphinxes. The Sphinx is depicted in the visual arts as a hybrid with a human head and a lion-like body. This figure first appeared in Egypt in the 3rd millennium BC and resembled a lion-like creature without wings and with a bearded head of a man. It is mentioned in the pyramid text under the name Lion God and is related to Atum, a connection that is also referenced in the Book of the Dead. The lion god is interpreted as a guardian deity, just as the Great Sphinx of Giza guards the kingdom of the dead, or the pyramid of Pharaoh Khafre. In the Eastern Mediterranean, the Sphinx appeared less monumental than in Egypt and is more common on cylinder seals and amulets. Even though in Egypt the Sphinx was depicted not only in monumental context but also as a favored decorative motif on small objects such as beads, talismans, and small bronze sculptures from earlier periods. The earliest Sphinx amulet dates to 2040 BC and is made of gold. From Egypt, the image of the Sphinx spread to Levant and the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean. And in the 14th century BC, it spread throughout the Near East in Greece, but was slightly differently portrayed from its Egyptian image, and wings were added to it, which continued to characterize it later in Asia and the classical world. Another innovation was a female sphinx, whose figure is depicted, for example, in frescoes from the Palace of Zimrilim in Mary, 18th century BC, and on carved ivory plaques from Acham Huyuk, Anatolia, 19th or 18th century BC. In Mesopotamia, representation of the Sphinx are known from the first half of the 3rd millennium BC on cylinder seals. Later, they appear on ivory, and in the 1st millennium BC, they enclose the entrances to the palaces of the kings, although in a different form than the Egyptian Sphinx. In the Minoan period, the Sphinx was known and is shown, for example, on a green jasper seal found by Sir Arthur Evans. Sphinx seals were also found at Mycenaean sites. In Minoan and Mycenaean art, sphinxes also appear on vases, murals, figurines, bronzes, and ivory plaques. The Sphinx arrived in Greece from Egypt in the 8th century BC, mediated by the Phoenicians, who brought artifacts by sea, although there is evidence of the Sphinx depictions on works of art from Crete as early as the 13th century BC. Greek sphinxes began to appear in funerary context and as votive offerings in sacred precincts, and unlike the Egyptian sphinxes, they were winged and with a woman's head and breasts. The sphinxes in Greece were regarded as temple keepers, and in the funerary context, they functioned as grave guardians and protectors of the dead. Since the Sphinx preserved temples and tombs, it is possible to assume that a gem engraved with the Sphinx was believed to protect its wearer. The funerary importance of the Sphinx is related to its demonic aspect, that is, its apotropaic function. The Sphinx repelled the evil eye by forcing the observer to keep a distance. This prophylactic role is implied in its use on warriors' helmets. For example, in Greek literature, the Sphinx is described as female and vicious and was sent by Hera, according to some versions, to destroy Boeotia. Hesiod called it a murderous monster and gave as an example the story of Oedipus and the Sphinx of Thebes. The depiction of the Sphinx in Rome are probably copies from a Greek source from the classical period that was the height of a standing man. The appearance of the motif so frequently in miniature art reinforces the assumption that the original was a famous monument. Perhaps it was even one of the statues given by Augustus as a gift to the temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill. In this case, it should be seen as a deliberate and intelligent political image. In 30 BC, when Egypt became a Roman province after the Roman won the Battle of Actium, the cult of Isis and Osiris became more popular and important than ever before. And as a result, Egyptian monuments and artifacts became very popular in Rome. Sphinxes represented on coins from this period, such as this coin from Pergamon, are interpreted as a declaration of a new era during the Augustus age, with the Sphinx becoming a symbol of hope. But as early as 42 BC, Augustus began to use the Sphinx as his seal, a symbol for the Regnum Apollinis, which the Sibyl had predicted to him. According to Pliny, at the beginning of his career, Augustus found among his mother ring 2 identical seals, on which sphinxes were carved. During the civil wars, his personal advisors used one of them in his absence to sign letters and proclamations, which the circumstances demanded be sent in his name. In later years, Augustus replaced the Sphinx device with that of Alexander the Great. In any event, the Sphinx, oracular creature as it is, soon became a common motif for various media of Augustan art, as shown, for example, on furniture. The fourth gem bears a representation of a sphinx attacking a warrior, both of them nude. It is reasonable to assume that such a depiction is derived from archaic gems. An Augustan gem from the Fitzwilliam Museum features the Sphinx standing on its hind legs and placing its front paws against the chest of a naked young man who kneels before her. Unlike the Jerusalem gem, the young man doesn't appear to be so threatened, and the riddling between Oedipus and the Sphinx is probably depicted here. As on a red figure calyx in the Vatican, attributed to the Oedipus painter and dating to 470 BC. In the interior of the cup, the Sphinx dominates, looming over a bearded Oedipus, seated very much in the attitude of a thinker. The crowned Sphinx is a very human monster. She has her lion body, but she is a lovely, attentive maiden. 2 special features characterize the Sphinx. She was a harpy carrying off men to destruction, an incarnate plague. She was the soothsayer with the evil habit of asking riddles, as well as answering them. Both functions, though seemingly alien, were characteristic of underworld bogies. The myth-making mind put them together and wove out of the 2 the tale of the unanswered riddle and the consequent deathly pest. In the 7th century BC, the Greek artists first began to depict the Sphinx in a narrative context, rather than as part of animal friezes. 2 of the earlier representations of sphinxes in the context of death of youth are a Laconian ivory from 650 BC and the Mycenaean architectural relief from circa 630 BC. Its demonic aspect is obvious and perhaps linked to Ker, the Homeric demon of death mentioned in the Iliad. Keres were spirits that brought evil, death demons. They also had another faction. They actually carried off souls to Hades. The Ker, a Sphinx. The Sphinx here is the prototype of the Ker of death, the attendant on the corpse, if not its swallower. Here, she is still a slightly remote agent of the supernatural, who, as she touches the central pillar of the coffin house, suggests a theme still current in modern Greek laments for the dead. The deceased says farewell to its home, symbolized by the pillar. In the 6th century BC, the theme evolved considerably, and the Sphinx is presented as chasing or abducting young boys, as seen, for example, on the calyx in the Getty Museum from the end of the century, where she carries a Theban youth over the sea. In the 6th century BC, its figure became transformed from a threatening monster into a creature that posed riddles and represented wisdom. And in the 5th century BC, it began to take shape as more feminine and sweet, with a pretty face and tumbling curls, a depiction that matches that given by Euripides of the Sphinx as a wise virgin with Incal riddles. The model is taken from Near Eastern art and appears in many Phoenician and Egyptian works of art, as demonstrated in a small ivory statuette dating from 1640 to 32 BC, and showing a sphinx holding between its paws a human victim. In Greek art, the subject appears in various media from 560 BC, including gems, bronze shields, and vases. The theme was particularly popular during the late archaic period. At the beginning of the classical period, the picture began to appear on vase paintings of sphinxes flanking scenes of battle or hunting, their role being to transfer the dead to the underworld. Aeschylus in the 7 Against Thebes mentions the appearance of the theme of the Sphinx as the man snatching care on shields. He describes her as the monster she is, a horrid bogey, eater of raw flesh with hungry jaws. Euripides describes a sphinx carrying its victim on the helmet of Achilles. On Attic vase painting, the subject was interpreted as the Athenian Ephebos, awaiting its inauguration as a hoplite. Another proposed interpretation is that the Sphinx is capable of being an interlocutor, both erotic and dangerous for youth, posing them riddles on masculinity while they are still inexperienced. In some scenes, the erotic allusions are clear and explicit, with the Sphinx straddling the nude man. A series of gems from Zazov catalog features a female Sphinx straddling a nude man in a distinctly erotic gesture. Among all the winged lovers and demons of death, the Sphinx is the most erotic when the dead are her victims as well as lovers. Sometimes she is referred to as the female hound of Hades, Cerberus' female counterpart. In myth, she is his niece. There is a combination of predator with its claws and wings and a beautiful face made for love, and thus an imprudent young man boasting of his wisdom might end his life devoured in her lair, which is a brothel filled with bones, according to Vermeule. Another example of a sphinx kidnapping a young warrior, armed and naked, although trying to fight back, appears on this gem dating from the beginning of the 5th century BC. A depiction of a young man who is still alive and fighting back, armed and ready to protect himself, was a new concept in that period. An unarmed young man in front of a sphinx appears again only later, during the classical period, in the group planned by Phidias for the throne of Zeus at Olympia. The theme of the abducting sphinx was both a popular and important one among the Greeks, appearing in various media, from archaic gems to large compositions such as that which once adorned the throne of Zeus of Phidias at Olympia, and copied in Ephesus, and should be seen as expressing a meditation on death, that could be seen as an act of love, despite being painful. The death envoy is always winged and can protect the body, sitting astride as a battle comrade, and even to mate with it. The Sphinx was regarded as resourceful and could therefore instruct mortals on how to handle this unknown situation. In summary, the Sphinx was perceived as a preserver of life as well as demon of death. She embodied a combination of a predator and a beautiful face made for love. On the one hand, she was an oracular creature that was the guardian of temples, palaces, and tombs. And on the other hand, she was a death envoy. Since sphinxes were the keepers of temples, palaces, and tombs, it is possible to assume that a gem engraved with a sphinx was believed to protect its wearer. The funerary importance of the sphinx is related to its demonic aspect, that is, its apotropic function. The sphinx repelled the evil eye by forcing the observer to keep a distance. This prophylactic role is implied in its use on warriors' helmets, for example. The sphinx who escorts the dead also protects the home. The sphinx, though mainly a prophetess, keeps harpy elements. She snatches away the youth at seeds. She is but a man seizing care. The theme of the abducting sphinx was both a popular and important one among the Greeks, appearing on various media, from archaic gems to large compositions, and should be seen as expressing a meditation on death that could be seen as an act of love, despite being painful. As time went on, the savage man-snatching aspect of the Sphinx faded, remembered only in the local legend, and her oracular aspect grew. The Sphinx is a tomb-haunting bogy, a care, but ultimately she fades into a decorative tomb monument, with always perhaps some prophylactic intent. Thank you.